version of Velocity Kinetics on the move. Again, this is not a review of my car, even though this is a completely different one to the one from last time. Keen watchers of the channel would know. But what I'm doing on the go, just having a nice Boxing Day drive. Hope you all had a good Christmas. Did you have a good Christmas, Sarah?
Yes.
So, just having a nice little Boxing Day drive, and I've tried to do the F1 review video for the year, and it's just not happened for one reason or another. Mostly because I just wanted to play Xbox, to be honest, after work. So, the season itself, I mean, it wasn't a bad season. If you think about it, lots of overtaking, a fairly close championship for most of the season. Then Mercedes just turned it on and left everyone for dead. From pre-season testing, it wasn't entirely clear who was on top, because everyone was watching Toro Rosso with what they were going to do with Honda. Everyone thought they'd made a colossal mistake going with Honda. You've also had those who are watching Mercedes to see what they would do. You had people watching Ferrari to see how they would do, because Ferrari were being unusually quiet over the winter. People were curious to see what Sirotkin would do, and whether Williams could get back and consolidate 5th place again. So it was a mixture of everything in pre-season. First race of the season wasn't fantastic, and F1 did seem to have a very knee-jerk reaction to that. They suddenly said, well, we need to change the rules, we need to do this, we need to do that. Now, it was very knee-jerk, very, very much so, but at the same time, they had to react to the situation at hand, and they couldn't afford to be seen as resting on their laurels, sitting on their asses doing bugger all. The season itself is one of mixed fortune. You had Sebastian Vettel leading the championship for a long time. You had Lewis Hamilton doing well. You had Valtteri Bottas, who was doing really well at the start of the year, suddenly tail off. You had Danny Rick, who suddenly at the start of the year was like, well, after he won 2 races, like, actually he might be a force to reckon with this year, and then suddenly drop off. You had then Max Verstappen looking like he might get fired from Red Bull because of his unique approach. You had Williams just suddenly in the middle of nowhere. You had Renault doing surprisingly well. You had Haas, who showed very well in winter testing, suddenly not showing as well as they could have done. It's hard to say what needed to be done. So for next year, they've changed the size of the front wing. They got rid of all the elements and scoops and upflicks to try and reduce the amount of turbulence in the aerodynamic shape of the car. What we mean by the aerodynamic shape of the car is, yes, the car might be, say for instance, it's shaped like a letter I, which in many ways it is. You've got your front wing, you've got the body, and then you've got the rear wing. It's no longer shaped like that I. When you're driving along, it's suddenly more like a giant triangle, and then the cars behind can't overtake because there's too much turbulence all around. So what they've done is they've simplified the front wing to stop what they call this outwash, which is all the spinning air making that giant triangle. They've increased the size of the rear wing, made it higher to hopefully push the turbulence above the cars, and made it so the DRS is going to open up wider for next year, and then dump more drag and should be able to overtake a bit more. Engines have stayed the same for next year, which is all pretty good. But we're back onto 2018. I can't say it was a season I was overly bowled over with. It would have been much better if Vettel and Ferrari had been able to keep the fight with Mercedes. Even if Hamilton still won, it'd have been much better if they could have kept that fight all the way to the end. So Mercedes, you can't fault them really. I mean, they had the best car at the end of the season. What the hell were they meant to do with it? Keep crashing it into the wall? Hire Pastor Maldonado. Lewis Hamilton, as insufferable as I find him, he's one of the best drivers of his generation. That's a fact. You put him in a bathtub and he'd find a way of trying to get it around the racetrack fastest. Valtteri, I personally think, now Sarah and I are both big fans of Valtteri, we like him quite a lot. We feel he was made to be number 2. Mercedes didn't really give him a chance from the start of the season, because he was made to give up the win in Russia. Toto Wolff made the wingman comment, calling him a wingman. Lewis Hamilton going, yeah, he's the best teammate I've ever had. But I'd be very curious to hear in a few years whether Valtteri says Lewis Hamilton was the worst teammate I've ever had. Trying to break my car, are you?
No, I'm trying to get more light.
But it'd be interesting to see what he said, if or what he says. He's been tight-lipped for now. On Instagram, he's looking like he's just having a nice time with his wife and his dog, which, good on him. He's entering in a rally, actually, at the start of next year. I hope he can come back. He is, without a doubt, a good talent. All these people saying, well, he's not actually as good a talent as we all thought, blah, blah, blah. I have two words. Fuck off. Alright, just fuck off, because he could be a world champion. There were reasons why Williams blocked his move to Ferrari. Ferrari wouldn't have been interested in him if he wasn't potential world championship material. Nico Rosberg was labelled very much as a number 2, and then he became world champion, and everyone's like, actually Rosberg was a pretty good driver. So I think Hamilton played the psychological game with Valtteri quite a few times, pretended he had a fault when he didn't have a fault. Like my tyres are blistering. Oh, they seem okay now after he'd had the place given to him. So I wouldn't be surprised if we hear some fallout from them next year, especially with Ocon in the background, another Mercedes prodigy. Ferrari, they dropped the ball this year. Vettel, I don't know what he was doing. WTF1 podcast made a comment about this. I don't understand what Vettel was doing whenever he got clipped. His car always seemed to spin. It never slid, it spun. So whether he kept his foot in it, trying to... Excuse me, that's traffic. Anyway, what was I? So Vettel's car always spun. It never slid or sort of went a little bit offline. It always spun. Whether he kept his foot in it to try and get the car going in the right direction again, I don't know. I think he lost the edge after Germany, because I think he was leading so well. He had the psychological victory over Hamilton, and not just and the actual physical victory. But he beat Hamilton at Silverstone, Hamilton's home turf, and he was on course to win on his own home turf in Germany, and lost. The team did what they could to try and get back. They kept very quiet over winter. So far they've been pretty quiet. They've just announced when they're going to launch their car, and that's it. No major hirings and firings. Raikkonen got a victory, but he's off to Sauber next year. Kimi actually had quite a solid season. He was on a podium several times, and got a good haul of their points. I think someone did the maths and worked out that Kimi actually scored more points for the team than Vettel did, or was at least in the points more often. Who on to next? Red Bull. They had another petulant year with Renault, going, oh, it's your fault. When actually it's just them being, to be honest, they're like Lamborghini in some senses. They're just a upstart. They're jumped up. They think they're much better than they actually are. Mind you, Lamborghini these days are actually pretty good. But anyway, Red Bull, they did a pretty good job. They've won in places they shouldn't have won. Car was very well put together. Danny Rick had an awful reliability record, absolutely awful. They lose him for next year. They're getting Pierre Gasly up from the Toro Rosso, and Danny Rick is off to Renault. They're going to keep being there or thereabouts, I think, Red Bull, but a lot depends on what happens next year, because they're now divorcing from Renault. They're going to be Red Bull racing Honda next year, which I'll be interested to see how that goes. I'm not going to lie, I've got a feeling they're going to throw Honda under the bus very quickly. What's annoying is nothing's ever Red Bull's fault. It's always someone else's. But we'll see. We'll see what lessons they've learned from their sister team. whilst we're talking about the sister team, Toro Rosso had a pretty impressive season with Honda. Got 4th place at one of the Grand Prix with Pierre Gasly. Gasly is up to Red Bull, and for next year they've got Kvyat and Alexander Albon in the car. They used a lot more engines and parts than everyone else did again, but the Honda actually showed some improvement. And I think the issue was McLaren built the back end of their car, Honda built the engine, and then when they tried to put them both together, everyone was surprised that it didn't fit. Whereas Toro Rosso actually spoke to Honda and said, well, how does your engine need to be fitted? And then they built the car around that. Or they went to Honda and said, this is what we want on the back end of the car, build the engine around this. Brendan Hartley didn't have such a good season at all, but Pierre is also a pretty solid driver, so it might just simply be he's been made to look worse than he actually was. There's not really an awful lot to say about Toro Rosso. They claim the car was virtually unchanged throughout the whole season. We'll see what they can continue to do with Honda. Don't know whether Red Bull are now effectively going to become the works team, or whether it's going to be Honda and they just happen to be supplying 2 teams. But I say pretty solid. We'll see how they go. Renault won their best of the rest in the championship. Nico Hulkenberg and Carlos Sainz were a good partnership. They are a good partnership. I can't come up too fast behind me to overtake this stupid freaking Qashqai ahead of me. Bloody hate them. Bloody hate Qashqais. Come on up. Put your foot down. Sound like Colin McRae from one of the early games. When you're ready, put your foot down. But words. I'm running out of words. Fair do we go around, shall we? Renault did a very, very good job with what they had. They've continued a solid progression forwards. They got Danny Ricciardo for next year, which to me is a signal of their intent that they intend to become contenders, very major players if they can. I hope they can continue the upward trend that they've had, because no one else aside from Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull have been on the podium. Absolutely no one. You've had a Force India on a podium and a Williams on the podium in the last 2 years, and that's happened once. So hopefully they can break the cycle and buck the trend. I might put a cheeky bet on a bet for Ricciardo to take a win over the season and Hulkenberg to get a podium, because Hulken unfortunately is still not broken his duck. He is beaten, I think it's Andre Cesaris's record of number of races without a podium. Highest number of race starts. Please stop the stupid cactus. Yes. Oh, shit. I am on 1 too far. There we go. Sorry, I've got thrown because the Citroen cactus was coming at me and didn't look like he was going to stop on the roundabout. We'll see what they can do. The team, like I said, they seem much improved. If you're not on, don't follow them on Twitter. They're bloody hilarious to follow. So give them a follow. Haas, they did all right this season. They're the only other team aside from Mercedes to retain their driver lineup for next year. K-Mag was maybe a bit aggressive at times on his defence, but at the same time, what is he meant to do? Just let them walk by. So he's a little bit controversial in that sense, but given how he was meant to be the next Lewis Hamilton years ago. Someone let me out, please. Thank you, Mr. Fiesta. But given that he was meant to be the next Lewis Hamilton, and then McLaren absolutely shat on his reputation, I think he's doing pretty well. It's a shame that they didn't get on the podium, because their car was so close in design to the Ferrari. They should have been a bit better than what they were. Roman, it was a couple of points away from a race ban, which it's a surprise really, because I thought Roman was a bit more restrained, especially after the ban he got a few years ago. But we'll see what they do for next year. It's good that they're still hanging on in there. Sauber, with Alfa Romeo branding, did very well. We had young Charles Leclerc do a good job, especially after Baku. It seemed to take him up until then to get up and running, get up to speed. Marcus Ericsson has committed the ultimate sin as an F1 driver. He's just been far too anonymous for far too long. He's now off to Indy, and he's basically spat his dummy out saying, well, F1's not fun, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but mate, he never set the world on fire when he was in F1. That is the worst thing. He never set the world on fire. He was just there to be there. There are other people with just as much talent, if not more, that could have performed even better than he did. Next year they've got Antonio Giovinazzi and Kimi Raikkonen to drive that Sauber forwards. Now I reckon it might be because Charles Leclerc is going up to Ferrari, and I reckon that it's been partially done so if Leclerc struggles, they'll just swap Giovinazzi back into Ferrari, or they'll swap Raikkonen back into the seat. But we'll see what they can do. They did, like I said, did very well. The car looked really nice. But we'll see what they can do next year. Force India went bust halfway through the season, so next year they're Racing Point. So they better start getting some points, otherwise that's going to be a bit ironic as a name, isn't it? They lose Ocon, they gain Lance Stroll for next year. They still got Sergio Perez. Now, it'll be interesting to stack Stroll against Sergio, because Sergio's been in F1 a number of years now, and Stroll has just been labelled as a pay driver. Never mind the fact he's won every championship he's come through, but then again, think about it. Daddy Stroll bought Force India, and now Lance is going in that team. It really, the odds have not been stacked in Lance's favour at all. But Force India did a reasonably good job. We'll have to see what they do next year. Maybe a tiny bit too anonymous at times, but a pretty solid season for them. McLaren, oh good God, they got rid of Honda, so that's why Toro Rosso went to Honda, because the engine supply was going spare, and McLaren went to Renault. Last year McLaren were on about our chassis is the best, it's the best, it's the best. No, absolutely not. They couldn't have spoken more shit if they tried. Where's all this traffic come from? They couldn't have talked more rubbish if they tried. They put the Renault engine in the back and didn't go any further forwards. They stayed right where they were. Technical difficulties. So where was I? Alonso, he won Le Mans this year with Toyota, so Alonso's really been mentally checked out most of the year. He's gone into some sort of retirement. McLaren have got a habit of not saying their drivers have retired, they're just going on sabbatical. Much like I'm just on a sabbatical from Safestyle from when I worked there in 2009. I'm just on a long-term sabbatical, never actually quit. And then Van Dorn, I feel so sorry for Stoffel, because he actually did a pretty solid job. He had subpar machinery the whole time. Now people go, well, he should have done better, Like, he went up against Alonso. It's like me going into the ring against Mike Tyson. I'm going to get my shit handed to me. You know, sorry about the technical difficulties, the camera got full. So where was I? Stoffel Van Dorn, yeah, it wasn't fair. He's gone to Formula E, heading up HWA's entry, which is preparation for Mercedes to come in to Formula E, and I can't work out where to hold the camera to get central, I do apologise. And in one of his first practice sessions, he topped it. So, you know, and he's got the simulator driving role with Mercedes as well. So, hopefully, we'll see him back. He was very highly rated. I always liked him. He always seemed very honest, and the fact he got there without having to pay was always a plus point. And finally, if I remember rightly, I think I've done all the teams aside from this one, is Williams. What a season. How awful. Worst car they've designed in a very long time. They have got to improve. They've lost Sirotkin. Someone suggested it was because they couldn't get the Russian money anymore because Russia's had heavier sanctions imposed on it. Some people suggested it just wasn't up to scratch. Some people suggested that Kubica has bought a bigger sponsorship package. In regards to Kubica, head over and watch the previous video to this, which is Disability in Motorsport, where I talk about Kubica. He's now the race driver along with George Russell, which is a good move, but overall the team did not have a very good year, and they need to be careful because they're the worst of the Mercedes engine runners. Mercedes might want to pull the supply. Rumour is, though, that they're getting some sort of discount for running Russell, which, if they are, that is a very fantastic opportunity for them. They've lost Rob Smedley. They got Paddy Lowe heading up the team this time, and in general, we'll just see how they go. The rest of the season was a bit hit and miss. I didn't like the Hamilton on a roll at the end of the season, but as well documented, the pair of us are not really
Hamilton fans.
Not at all. So we'll see how it goes. If you look at it race by race, so don't look at it over the whole season. It was actually quite a good season. You had amazing races like Baku and Bahrain was interesting for a change. The Halo did its job, an ugly looking thing, but it's doing what it's supposed to do, and there's not a lot else we can do about that. Hopefully we'll see a reverse in the order, a change in the order. It'd be nice for Williams to get back up there. It'd be nice to see Renault get a couple of victories next year. Whilst I'm not a particularly big fan of Red Bull, it'd be interesting if they can get a win or two under their belt with Honda power, and then that will just really highlight how much McLaren were talking out their backside when they were paired with Honda. That's really all I've got to say on it. Have you got any thoughts on the season?
No, not really.
Think
would be like to see Bottas actually be allowed to show his full potential, but because he's paired with Hamilton, it's not likely to happen.
There we go. But anyway, don't think that this will probably be the last video of the year, and we'll see when we can get out and do some more videos at some point. Just remember to drive safe and be sensible over New Year's, and I would say if you're planning on going out drinking on New Year's, absolutely don't drive. Rather than doing this whole, can I have a pint and then drive, just make it easier on yourself. Either if you're driving, just stick to soft drinks, or get a taxi. But we'll see you next year. Thank you.